Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan was re-elected as the chairman of the AKP in the party's emergency congress on Sunday. Following his re-election, Erdoğan traveled to Brussels to attend the NATO Leaders Summit. Tonight, we're joined by Suat Kınıklıoğlu to talk about Turkey's relations with NATO and the EU in the wake of this week's summit. Suat Kınıklıoğlu is the former Turkey representative of the German Marshall Fund and also a former member of the Turkish Parliament. Good evening, Mr. Kınıklıoğlu. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So let's start by talking about the NATO summit. You're currently in Bratislava, but for another defense-related meeting, if I'm not wrong. But as you know, an important component of this NATO summit for Turkey was the bilateral meetings President Erdoğan held with European leaders. And as you know, the tension between Turkey and Germany escalated following the arrest of two German-Turkish journalists, but now it seems to have reached a new level after the Turkish government blocked a group of German lawmakers from visiting troops stationed at Turkey's Incirlik air base. And following this incident, there's been a crisis and a war of words between the German Chancellor Merkel and the Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, as you may have followed. Merkel has said if they were not allowed to visit the troops at the air base, they were ready to abandon the Incirlik air base. And in response to this, the Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu said, if they want to, I quote, if they want to leave, let's just say goodbye. That's up to them, and we won't beg them. So how do you evaluate this attitude currently being pursued by Ankara? Is the Turkish government really ready for the German troops to leave Incirlik, or are they perhaps not perceiving this threat to be realistic?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't agree with this approach at all. I think it's dangerous to risk important relationships as one with Germany is. I think what many people in Turkey also do not understand is that the German army is responsible to the German Bundestag, the German parliament. And the mood in the parliament is actually quite negative towards Turkey due to this limitation of German parliamentarians visiting Incirlik. They are looking for options in Jordan, and I actually came to Bratislava from Berlin, and I had some meetings about this issue in Berlin. And it seems that there is a growing momentum within the German parliament that if this crisis continues, that the German troops should be relocated to Jordan. But what I think many in Turkey do not understand is that this is not only about just moving troops to another base. If Germany would move its soldiers and aircraft to a base in Jordan, this would actually mean that Germany's responsibility under Article 5 would be very much damaged, that Germany would view Turkey as no longer as an ally that is worth of following up Article 5, namely coming to the support of Turkey if Turkey would be attacked. That said, just before I came to this program, I just saw on German Twitter accounts that I think there is a lessening of tensions whereby Turkey has now agreed German parliamentarians to visit the Konya base, not Incirlik, because the Konya base is a NATO base, whereas Incirlik is a national base. So there seems to be a little bit of decreasing of tensions, but I think it's unfortunate that only after a threat by Mrs. Merkel that this came about, and this is increasing Turkey's negative perception as an ally within NATO.
Now let's shift our focus on the NATO summit itself. Before we do that, we will now watch a news video on the NATO summit, and then we'll be back with you in the studio.
The NATO Leaders Summit was held in Brussels this week. Prior to the summit, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held meetings with EU officials and EU leaders. During the meetings, the current situation of Turkey-EU relations and possible upcoming steps toward Turkey's accession to the bloc were discussed. Furthermore, following the summit, NATO is set to formally join the US-led coalition against Islamic State. Prior to the NATO summit on May 25th, President Erdogan met with Council of Europe President Donald Tusk and European Commission head Jean-Claude Juncker. We discussed the need to cooperate, Donald Tusk tweeted following the meeting, adding that he put human rights at the center of the discussion. Following the meeting, President Erdogan stated that the EU should decide on its future perspective with regards to Turkey's membership. We don't aim to break away from the EU, but the EU shall take its responsibilities too, Erdogan added. Furthermore, during the NATO summit, President Erdogan also met with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. President Erdogan and Chancellor Merkel discussed the developments in Syria, the Incirlik air base, and the extradition of the veto members from Germany. German federal government spokesperson Steffen Seibert stated that Chancellor Merkel told President Erdogan that it's necessary for German MPs to visit the German soldiers at the Incirlik air base. Seibert also added that Merkel requested the release of journalist Deniz Yücel during the meeting. Moreover, during his meeting with President Macron, President Erdogan and President Macron agreed to boost annual trade to €20 billion and improve Ankara's diplomatic ties with the Union. According to the French presidential sources, President Macron requested the release of the jailed French photojournalist Mathias Depardon and has been informed by President Erdogan that he would rapidly look into the case. Earlier in the week, the press freedom group Reporters Without Borders, RSF, had stated that Depardon, who had been held in Turkey for over 2 weeks, has begun a hunger strike. Furthermore, during the NATO summit, US President Donald Trump stated that the NATO members owe massive amounts of money from previous years. President Trump also did not pledge support for NATO's common defense provision, known as Article 5. Following the summit, NATO is set to formally join the US-led coalition against Islamic State.
Welcome back, Mr. Kınıklıoğlu. A striking outcome of this week's NATO summit was the organization's decision to formally join the US-led coalition against ISIS. So could you explain to us what this means for Turkey in particular?
Actually, surprisingly, it doesn't mean much because the decision has a lot of political and psychological significance, but in action and as far as operational business is concerned, it doesn't mean much other than NATO tanker aircraft giving more support to the coalition against ISIS and a little bit more coordination that is already underway. So I think it has a more psychological and political impact rather than an operational one on the ground. But what does it also substantiate is that with the first time President Trump attending this NATO summit, or this NATO meeting, we see a renewed determination to deal with terrorism, in this case ISIL. So I think the decision has an impact beyond the operational details on the ground, but more so on the psychological and political level, especially at a time when we had again this week, unfortunately, terror attacks in Manchester, in Indonesia, and many other places, which is destined to make terrorism and the fight against terrorism the #1 issue.
Mm-hmm. And in light of these recent developments and perhaps others, including talks of a potential arms deal between Russia and Turkey, what's your take on the future of Turkey-NATO relations, or let's say Turkey's relations with the West in general?
Well, Turkey's relations with the West have been deteriorating since 2013, and that has partly to do with what's happening inside Turkey, namely the limitations on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, etc. And I think the second aspect of that deterioration of relations has to do with Turkey's increasing the lack of clarity of Turkish decision makers of where Turkey's strategic identity lies. And this has been accentuated with this air defense system, which Turkey was trying to buy from China. Now it's shifted to Russia, but both of these systems are non-NATO compliant systems, which obviously are a problem for the alliance because it needs to be integrated with the NATO air defense system. But what's more problematic, we see it both in Turkey-EU relations, but also in Turkey-NATO relations, is the unpredictability of Turkey's foreign policy behavior, as well as Turkey's image as a staunch ally in former decades is pretty much gone. So what we see is, unfortunately, also with the case with the German parliamentarians trying to visit their forces in Incirlik, we see this unpredictability that makes Turkey a less reliable ally within NATO. NATO membership for Turkey is extremely important. It's because Turkey is one of the fundamental actors within NATO. Until recently, it was a fundamental actor within NATO and always seen as a fundamental membership that would confirm Turkey's Western vocation. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, this image and this membership is no longer seen in the way as it used to be. I hope, as we've seen today with the softening between Turkey and Germany, that Turkey will understand again that its security interests lie within a strong relationship with NATO, and its economic and political future lies with Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kınıklıoğlu, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Nuriye Gülmen and Semih Özakça, who have been on hunger strike for 79 days to protest the government purge against public officials, were arrested on Tuesday. Gülmen and Özakça are charged with being members of a terrorist group.
The two educators, Nuriye Gülmen and Semih Özçaka, have lost their jobs after the Turkish government fired thousands of academics, bureaucrats and civil servants from their offices through statutory decrees issued under the state of emergency. After losing their academic positions, Gülmen and Özçaka started a voluntary and indefinite hunger strike that has been going on for 79 days now. On the 75th day of their hunger strike, the two educators were taken into custody with a night raid to their houses. A day later, on Tuesday, they were arrested by an Ankara court on charges of membership of a terror organization. In their indictment, Ankara prosecutors asked for up to 20 years jail time for the pair, charging them with membership in a terror group and terror propaganda, as state-run Anadolu agencies reported. The indictment stated that the hunger strike was transformed from being an innocent demand of them asking for their rights into an activity in which the organization gained members. It also stated that if their health condition had worsened, it would trigger mass protests similar to the Gezi Park protests in 2013. The two educators are specifically accused of being members of the Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front, an outlawed Marxist group in Turkey. The Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu claimed that Nuriye Gülmen and Semih Özçaka had organic ties with DHKPC and their actions were supported by this organization. They said one of them is a teacher and the other is an academic. No offense, but we do not send our children to schools so that they can get educated as terrorists, Soylu said. Officials from the main opposition parties, CHP and HDP, reacted against the minister for his unsubstantiated accusation. Özçaka and Gülmen have been surviving on lemon and salt water and sugar solutions since they began their hunger strike in March. They are planning to continue their strike in the prison.
This week is the International Week of Disappearances in Custody. Our friend Zeynep Ekmekçe did an interview on Wednesday about forcible disappearances with Sebla Arcan, a representative from the Human Rights Association of Turkey.
We can say that enforced disappearances in Turkey started with the September 12, 1980 coup d'etat. 3 people were forcibly disappeared before 1980, but it was not adopted as a continuous strategy. In the aftermath of the coup d'etat, 15 people were forcibly disappeared after being taken under custody. The systemization of enforced disappearance as a state policy came into being during the 1990s. In this decade, enforced disappearance is more terrifying than other crimes because it targets the feeling of obscurity. The feeling of not knowing what happened to your loved one is merely terrifying. They use this feeling to silence and to suppress the opposition. During the 90s, the strategy of enforced disappearance targeted everyone: children, elderly people, and women. Doctors, lawyers, human rights defenders, and journalists were forcibly disappeared. It is true that it was more common in the Kurdish regions, which were ruled under state of emergency during the 90s. But there were cases of enforced disappearance in big cities like Izmir, Istanbul, and Mersin as well. 1994 is the year with the highest number of enforced disappearances. According to the records of the Human Rights Association, 328 families had applied to the association claiming that their relatives had been disappeared. Only in 1994, 328 people. We have received more than 900 applications in total and have confirmed 550 of these cases of enforced disappearance. We have also notified the United Nations about 550 confirmed cases. But it is important to note that searching for a disappeared person or a relative was also a reason to be forcibly disappeared. Lawyers and relatives of the disappeared were also taken under custody and then forcibly disappeared. This is why we are reluctant to claim that these are the exact numbers, because some people might have just feared to apply to the association.
Now we'll have a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
Do you want to sing jazz? The microphone is yours. Tonight you can sing jazz on stage, accompanied by Sibel Köse'in Tamirhane. Don't miss this opportunity to have fun in a jazzy style with your friends. The entrance fee is 35 Turkish liras. French Institute presents the Istanbul Underground Photo Exhibition. You can meet with the Turkish authors who have emerged from the underground until the 13th of July. These marginal authors defy classifications. They are proof that another literature, an alternative artistic production, exists in the 24th century Turkey. Isolated in the anonymity of the large sprawling cities, they emerge in reviews, blogs, and are sometimes illustrated in poems or mythical narratives like Metin Kaçan's Tisigen Blues. In this photo exhibition, the French photographer Philippe Dupuis sheds light on Turkish underground literature.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Bye.
İlk aşkınızı hatırlar mısınız? 10 yaşında devlet konservatuvarında eğitime başladığımda hayatımın aşkıyla tanıştım. O benim ilk kemanımdı. Uzun bir yolculuk hayat. Ben Bursa'da küçük bir mahallede büyüdüm. Ailemde müzisyen yok. Bazı anlar vardır, sayesinde bütün kapılar önünüzde açılır. İstanbul Kültür Sanat Vakfı'nın 40. yılında başlattığı Festival Genç Solistini Arıyor yarışmasına katıldığımda 21 yaşındaydım. Yarışmanın ilk keşfi ben oldum. İstanbul Müzik Festivali'nde sahne aldığım o gün hayatımın dönüm noktası oldu. Hayal bile edemeyeceğim şeyleri başarabileceğimi gösterdi.
...2012'de İstanbul Müzik Festivali'nin genç solisti olan, 2015'te Aydın Gün Teşvik Ödülünü kazanan Emre Engin, eğitimini New York'ta sürdürüyor. İstanbul Kültür Sanat Vakfı 45 yıldır Türkiye'nin kültür ve sanat yaşamına katkıda bulunuyor. 45 yıllık tarihimizin parçası olan, çalışmalarımızı mümkün kılan sanatçılara, izleyicilere, destekçilere teşekkür ederiz. İstanbul Kültür Sanat Vakfı